Montana Territory, 1871. The late January wind cut through Isaiah Quinn's worn coat like 1,000 tiny knives, making him wonder, not for the first time, why he'd chosen to settle in this godforsaken stretch of Montana wilderness. The merciless winter had already claimed 2 of his cattle, and he feared more would follow before the thaw. As he trudged through knee-deep snow toward his modest ranch house, a biting gust nearly knocked the lantern from his frozen fingers. 26 years old, and what did he have to show for it? A struggling cattle operation, a drafty cabin, and not a soul to share it with. The way Isaiah figured, that was exactly how it needed to be. A man couldn't risk getting attached out here. The frontier took everything eventually, your livestock, your dreams, and anyone foolish enough to love you. Better to face it alone than watch someone else suffer for your failures. The twilight sky hung heavy with the promise of more snow as Isaiah stamped his boots on the porch. The emptiness of his cabin greeted him like an old friend, predictable, demanding nothing. He had built these walls with his own hands after arriving 3 years ago, fleeing memories of a family lost to typhoid back east. Here, isolation was his shield against further heartbreak. Isaiah ran a hand through his dark brown hair, still thick despite the harsh elements. His face, though weathered by sun and wind, retained its youthful angles, with a strong jaw often covered in light stubble by day's end. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders built from years of ranch work, he might have caught the eye of any eligible woman in town, if he ever bothered to go there for more than supplies. No sense in thinking about company, he muttered to his empty cabin as he stoked the dying embers in the fireplace. The sound of his own voice startled him sometimes, unused as it was. Just me and these 4 walls, the way it should be. But deep down, in moments of weakness when the winter nights stretched endlessly before him, Isaiah wondered if his solitary existence truly was the safer path, or merely the lonelier one. He settled into his evening routine, heating beans, checking his rifle, planning tomorrow's work, when the first howl reached his ears. Not wolves, something else. He paused, listening harder as the wind momentarily died down. There it was again, unmistakably human, a cry for help. Isaiah hesitated. Night rescues were dangerous business. Plenty of good men had frozen to death chasing phantom sounds in blizzards. Yet something in that distant cry pierced his carefully constructed wall of indifference. "Damn it all," he growled, reaching for his coat. Whatever poor soul was out there wouldn't last the night in this cold. He couldn't just sit here, warm and safe, while death stalked the darkness beyond his door. Minutes later, with lantern held high and rifle slung across his back, Isaiah followed the increasingly desperate cries into the growing storm. His breath fogged before him as snowflakes swirled in the lantern light, disorienting and thick. The terrain sloped downward, leading him toward the creek that marked his property's northern boundary. "Hello," he called. "Keep shouting." "I'm coming toward you." The answering voice was weaker now. We're here, oh God, please hurry." Isaiah's heart sank. Multiple people stranded in this weather meant multiple potential casualties. He quickened his pace, snow crunching beneath his boots. The lantern light finally caught something unnatural amid the white landscape, the broken remains of a wagon, half buried in a snowdrift. One wheel jutted skyward like a monument to frontier misfortune. Nearby, huddled against the partial shelter of a fallen tree, sat a young woman clutching 5 children of varying ages to her. Isaiah approached cautiously, scarcely believing what he was seeing. In the dim light, the woman's fear-stricken face turned upward. Despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but notice her striking features, pale skin contrasting with dark brown hair that escaped from beneath a threadbare wool scarf. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse from shouting. "We thought no one would come." The children, ranging from what looked like about 10 years down to an infant bundled against her chest, stared at him with hollow-eyed fear. "What happened?" Isaiah asked, kneeling beside them. "Wheel broke. My husband's horse spooked and ran. He went after it hours ago." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Her husband hadn't returned and likely wouldn't. "How long have you been out here?" "Since midday," her teeth chattered violently. "The children are so cold, I can't feel my feet anymore." The oldest boy, thin-faced and solemn, spoke up. "Mama said an angel would come." His serious expression bore the premature gravity of a child who'd seen too much hardship. "Not an angel," Isaiah said, awkwardly avoiding the boy's trusting gaze. "Just a rancher." My place is about half a mile from here. Can you walk, ma'am? She attempted to stand but crumpled immediately, her frozen feet refusing to support her weight. The youngest children began to cry. I'll have to carry you then the little ones, Isaiah said, already calculating how many trips it would take. The storm was worsening by the minute. My name is Nora Taylor, she managed through chattering teeth. Her brown eyes, despite their fear, held a dignity that struck him. These are my children, James, Sarah, William, Lucy, and baby Thomas. Isaiah Quinn, he replied, surprised at how rusty his social graces had become. We need to move quickly, the little ones first, I think. He gathered the two youngest children, Lucy, who couldn't have been more than 3, and the baby into his arms. James, he said to the oldest boy, who looked about 10, I need you to hold this lantern and follow me exactly. Your sister will follow you. He turned to the middle child, a boy of perhaps 6. William, you hold your brother's hand. Stay right behind him. Can you do that? The children nodded solemnly. Nora grabbed Isaiah's sleeve with a trembling hand. Please don't leave me, she whispered. I'll be back for you straight away, Isaiah promised, struck by the vulnerability in her eyes. He guessed her to be about 24, though hardship had etched premature lines around her mouth. Stay awake. That's important. The journey to his cabin was a nightmare of howling wind and disoriented children struggling through deep snow. Isaiah broke trail as best he could, constantly checking that the older children remained close. By the time they reached his door, little Sarah was weeping with cold and exhaustion. He stoked the fire to blazing, arranged blankets near the hearth, and left the children huddled there with stern instructions to stay put. The return journey seemed twice as long, his anxiety mounting with each step. When he finally found Nora again, her eyes had closed, her breathing shallow. Mrs. Taylor, he said sharply, shaking her shoulder. Nora. You need to stay awake. Her eyelids fluttered. The children. They're safe at my cabin. Now it's your turn. She was light in his arms, too light, he thought with concern. Beneath her threadbare coat, he could feel the sharp angles of her shoulders, suggesting she'd been giving what little food they had to her children. Her dark brown hair, loosened from its pins, brushed against his chest as he carried her through the deepening snow. By the time they reached his cabin, Isaiah could barely feel his own limbs. He kicked the door open, relieved to see the children still huddled by the fire where he'd left them. Mama, they cried in unison as he gently laid Nora on his bed. She needs warming up, Isaiah explained, his voice gentler than usual as he addressed the frightened faces. And so do all of you. I'll make some hot broth. As he busied himself at the stove, Isaiah's mind raced. The storm showed no signs of abating. This woman and her 5 children would need shelter for days, perhaps longer. His isolated existence had just been shattered by the very thing he'd spent years avoiding: responsibility for others, the possibility of loss, of failure. The oldest boy, James, stood watching him with serious eyes. Is my mama going to die like Papa? Isaiah nearly dropped the ladle he was holding. Your pa died. Last summer. Fever took him. The boy's matter-of-fact tone belied the tragedy of his words. That's why we were heading to my uncle's place in Helena. Isaiah felt a tightness in his chest. Not a husband gone after a spooked horse then, but a widow traveling alone with 5 young children through the Montana winter. The danger she'd put them in seemed foolhardy, desperate. Your mama's strong, Isaiah said finally, unsure how to comfort a child he barely knew. She just needs warming up and some food. We haven't had much food, James admitted. Mama gives us most of hers. Isaiah nodded, a strange mixture of admiration and anger welling up inside him. Admiration for her sacrifice, anger at the circumstances, or perhaps at himself, for his years of deliberate isolation while others struggled just beyond his boundaries. He fed the children first, watery broth strengthened with the last of his salted venison, soaked into stale bread. They ate ravenously, confirming his suspicion that they'd been near starvation. When Nora finally roused enough to take some broth, her first question wasn't about herself but them. Are the children warm enough? She asked, her voice barely audible. They're fine, Isaiah assured her. You need to worry about yourself now. Her brown eyes, fever-bright, searched his face. Why did you help us? The question caught him off guard. Anyone would have. She shook her head weakly. No, not anyone, not out here. A pause, thank you. Something in her gaze, vulnerability mingled with fierce determination, made Isaiah look away first. Get some rest, we'll figure things out when the storm passes. But as the night deepened, and the blizzard raged around his suddenly crowded cabin, Isaiah Quinn faced an uncomfortable truth. His carefully constructed solitude lay in ruins around him, and perhaps most unsettling of all, some part of him, a part he thought long dead, didn't want it back. Dawn broke clear and brittle cold after the storm. Isaiah had slept fitfully in his chair, waking often to check on his unexpected guests. The children were curled together near the hearth like a litter of puppies, while Nora occupied his bed, her face finally peaceful in sleep. In the harsh morning light, Isaiah took proper stock of his situation. His winter provisions, already sparse, wouldn't stretch to feed 6 additional mouths for long. The nearest town, Cottonwood Springs, lay 15 miles south, too far to travel with exhausted children and a weakened woman, especially with snow this deep. As he built up the morning fire, trying to move quietly, Nora stirred in the bed. Her eyes, when they opened, were clearer than they had been the night before. "Mr. Quinn," she said softly, pushing herself up on one elbow. Her dark brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, no longer confined by pins. "I owe you an explanation." "No need," Isaiah replied gruffly, uncomfortable with the intimacy of seeing her this way. Anyone would have done the same. She smiled faintly, the expression warming her pale features. "We both know that's not true," she glanced toward her sleeping children. "We were desperate. My brother-in-law in Helena is our only family left. After Thomas was born, our farm in Nebraska failed completely. There was nothing left to sell, no way to survive the winter. So you set out in December, with 5 children." Isaiah couldn't keep the judgment from his voice. A flash of pride crossed her face. "We left in October. Broken axles, sick horses, wrong turns, everything that could delay us did, but we had no choice." Her voice lowered. "The bank was taking our land, the children were already hungry." Isaiah nodded slowly, chastened by the quiet dignity in her explanation. 24 years old, widowed with 5 children, facing impossible choices, who was he to judge her? "I'm grateful," she continued. "More than I can say, but we won't impose on your kindness for long. If you could help us reach town when the children are stronger." "Town's 15 miles," Isaiah interrupted, "and the snow's 3 feet deep in places. You're not going anywhere for a while." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "You're welcome here until it's safe to travel." Relief and something else, perhaps pride again, flickered across her face. "We won't be a burden. I can cook, clean, mend. The older children can help with chores." Isaiah wanted to tell her that wasn't necessary, but the truth was, he needed the help. With cattle to tend and firewood to chop, another pair of hands would make a difference. And if he was honest with himself, the thought of company during the long winter evenings wasn't entirely unwelcome. "Fair enough," he said finally. "We'll work something out." The days that followed established an uneasy rhythm. Isaiah rose before dawn to check his cattle, grateful that the worst of the storm had passed without further losses. Nora took charge of his Spartan cabin, somehow transforming it with her presence. Meals appeared at regular times. His scattered possessions found homes in orderly arrangements. The children, initially shy and watchful, gradually relaxed into cautious exploration of their temporary haven. Isaiah found himself both drawn to and unsettled by the changes. He'd lived alone for so long that the constant presence of others felt like an ill-fitting garment, necessary but uncomfortable. Yet he couldn't deny the strange warmth that filled him when he returned from the bitter cold to find a fire blazing, food waiting, and eager faces turning toward the door. "Mr. Quinn caught 6 rabbits," James announced one evening as Isaiah stamped snow from his boots. The boy had taken to following him whenever permitted, soaking up knowledge about ranch work with an eagerness that betrayed how much he missed male guidance. "That means stew for days," Nora said approvingly, already reaching for the game bag. Her initial pallor had given way to a healthier glow, though Isaiah noticed she still ate less than she should, ensuring her children got the lion's share. "Found tracks of something bigger, too," Isaiah said as he hung his coat. "Maybe elk. I'll check tomorrow." "I can help track," James offered immediately. "Pa taught me some before he got sick." Isaiah exchanged a glance with Nora, noting her hesitation. "It's mighty cold for a boy," he said carefully. "James is hardy," Nora replied, though her eyes held concern. But I worry about frostbite. Your boots have holes, son. Isaiah cleared his throat. I might have some old ones that could work. Stuff them with rags and they'll do for a short trip. The boy's face lit up with such naked hope that Isaiah had to look away, uncomfortable with the responsibility of that joy. Later, after the children were asleep, the younger ones on pallets near the fire, James on a makeshift bed Isaiah had constructed from wooden crates and blankets, Nora joined him at the table where he was mending a bridle by lamplight. "You're good with him," she said quietly. "With all of them, really, they talk about you constantly." Isaiah kept his eyes on his work. Kids are easy to impress. All it takes is a few rabbits and some stories. "It takes more than that," she hesitated. "You've never had children of your own." "Never married." His tone made it clear the subject wasn't open for discussion. But Nora Taylor, he was learning, possessed a quiet persistence that wore down resistance like water over stone. "You chose this solitude," she observed. "May I ask why?" Isaiah's hands stilled on the leather. The question probed too close to old wounds, yet something in her gentle inquiry made him want to answer. "Lost my family back east. Parents, 2 sisters, typhoid." The words came stiffly, unpracticed. "Came out here afterward, figured it was safer to stand alone, no one to lose that way." "Except yourself," Nora said softly. Isaiah looked up, startled by her insight. Their eyes met across the lamplight, and for a moment he felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical nakedness. She saw too much. "It's late," he said abruptly, gathering his mending materials. "Dawn comes early." Nora didn't press further, but as she rose to check on her sleeping children, she paused beside him. "Thank you for James, the boots, the hunting. He needs that more than you know." Before he could respond, she had moved away, leaving only the faint scent of wood smoke and the soap he'd traded for in town months ago, now somehow transformed by its presence on her skin. Isaiah lay awake long after he should have been sleeping, troubled by emotions he'd thought safely buried. He'd spent 3 years convincing himself that connection was a liability, that caring for others was a fool's errand in a land that took more than it gave. Yet in less than a week, this woman and her children had made him question everything he thought he knew about survival. And that, he reflected as sleep finally claimed him, might be the most dangerous development of all. "Hold the stock steady now," Isaiah instructed, guiding James's small hands on the rifle. "Breathe slow and squeeze, don't pull." A week had passed since the rescue, and the weather had moderated enough for short excursions. Today, Isaiah had taken James to a clearing 100 yards from the cabin for his first shooting lesson. The rifle cracked, and a spray of bark erupted from a tree trunk 6 inches left of the target, a tin can perched on a stump. "I missed," James said, disappointment heavy in his voice. "You adjusted your aim at the last second," Isaiah explained. "Happens to everybody. Try again, and this time trust yourself." The boy nodded solemnly and reloaded as Isaiah had shown him. His second shot clipped the edge of the can, sending it spinning. "I hit it," James cried, his face transforming with a genuine smile, a rare sight that made him look his actual age rather than the prematurely serious child he usually appeared to be. "Good shooting," Isaiah approved, surprised by the pride that swelled in his chest. "One more try, then we'd best get back before your ma starts to worry." As they trudged back toward the cabin, James looked up at him with that direct gaze that still made Isaiah uncomfortable. "Were you always alone out here, Mr. Quinn?" "Pretty much," Isaiah answered, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Isaiah considered deflecting the question but found himself answering honestly. "Sometimes. But being alone means being free. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint." "I miss my pa," James said after a moment, "but I'm glad we found you instead of freezing. Mama says you're our guardian angel, even though you don't like being called that." Isaiah felt heat rise to his face despite the cold. "Your mama's just being kind." "No," James said with a child's certainty, "she means it. I heard her praying and thanking God for sending you." Isaiah didn't have a response for that. The idea that Nora saw him as some kind of divine intervention was unsettling. He was no savior, just a man who happened to hear a cry in the night, a man with more failures than successes to his name. As they approached the cabin, the scene before them gave Isaiah pause. Nora stood in the yard, wearing his old coat over her dress, chopping wood. The axe rose and fell in a steady rhythm as she split logs for the fireplace. Her face was flushed with exertion, her dark hair escaping its pins to curl around her face. "She shouldn't be doing that," Isaiah muttered, quickening his pace. "Mama's strong," James said matter-of-factly. "Stronger than she looks. Pa used to say she could outwork 2 men when she set her mind to it." Isaiah believed it. In the week since their arrival, Nora had proven herself remarkably capable, despite her initial weakness. She'd organized his chaotic stores, repaired clothing he'd given up for lost, and somehow stretched their limited provisions into meals that satisfied everyone. All this while caring for 5 children in a one-room cabin. She looked up as they approached, leaning on the axe with a small, defiant smile. "Successful hunting." "Target practice," Isaiah corrected, eyeing the substantial pile of split wood beside her. "You didn't need to do that." "You're feeding and housing 6 extra people," she replied evenly. "The least I can do is ensure we don't freeze while you're out hunting." Her quiet dignity made it impossible to argue without seeming condescending. Instead, Isaiah wordlessly took the axe from her hands, careful not to touch her fingers as he did so. "James hit the target," he said, changing the subject. "He's got a good eye." The boy beamed under his mother's approving gaze. "Mr. Quinn says I might be ready for rabbit hunting soon." "That's wonderful," Nora said, though Isaiah caught the flicker of something in her expression. Concern, perhaps, or worry about her son growing attached to a temporary guardian. "Sarah's watching the little ones," Nora continued. "I should check on them." As she turned toward the cabin, Isaiah found himself studying the graceful line of her neck where it disappeared into the collar of his oversized coat. She was beautiful in an unassuming way, not the painted beauty of saloon girls or the delicate refinement of Eastern ladies, but something more elemental. Beauty forged through hardship, like iron through fire. The thought disturbed him enough that he attacked the remaining wood with unnecessary vigor, sending chips flying as James watched admiringly. Later that evening, after a simple but satisfying supper of rabbit stew and the last of the cornbread, Isaiah found himself drawn into family rituals he'd never experienced in his solitary existence. Little Lucy climbed uninvited onto his lap as Nora read from a tattered Bible she'd salvaged from their wagon. William and Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, while James maintained his usual slightly apart position, too aware of his role as the eldest to fully relax. "The Lord is my shepherd," Nora read, her voice taking on a musical quality that held even the youngest children spellbound. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Isaiah wasn't a religious man, not anymore, not since typhoid had claimed his family despite all their prayers. Yet something in Nora's gentle recitation reached past his defenses, evoking memories of his mother reading those same words by lamplight long ago. Lucy's small head nodded against his chest as sleep overtook her. Without thinking, Isaiah adjusted his arm to support her more comfortably, his calloused hand looking impossibly large against her tiny shoulder. When he glanced up, he found Nora watching him, her expression soft in the firelight. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, of the strange family they had temporarily become. For the first time in years, Isaiah went to sleep that night without feeling the weight of solitude pressing down on him. Instead, surrounded by the gentle breathing of children and the knowledge of Nora's presence across the room, he felt something dangerously like contentment. "The supplies won't last another 2 weeks," Isaiah said quietly, careful not to wake the children as he and Nora sat at the table reviewing their situation. February had arrived with bitter winds and fresh snow, making any journey to town increasingly unlikely. Nora nodded, her face grave in the lamplight. "I've been stretching everything as far as possible." She hesitated. "Perhaps you should go to town alone. You could make better time without us slowing you down." "And leave you all here?" Isaiah shook his head firmly. "What if something happened?" "No, we either all go or no one goes." "The children are still too weak for such a journey," Nora said. "Especially Thomas, he's just a baby." Isaiah ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. 2 weeks of shared living had worn away many of his social barriers, allowing Nora to read his moods with increasing accuracy. "There's another option," he said finally. "Henderson's place is about 5 miles west. Older fellow keeps to himself mostly, but we help each other out when needed. He might have supplies to spare." Nora's expression brightened. 5 miles is manageable. Perhaps James and I could go with you. No, Isaiah said, more sharply than he intended. Sorry, it's just Henderson's unpredictable, decent enough, but he drinks and he's not used to company, especially women's company. Better if I go alone. He didn't add his other concern, that the isolation and harsh conditions had taken a toll on old Henderson's mind in recent years. The man was still a good neighbor by frontier standards, but his behavior had grown increasingly erratic. Isaiah didn't want to expose Nora or James to that uncertainty. I'll leave at first light, he continued. Should be back by nightfall, weather permitting. Nora studied him for a moment, then nodded. Be careful, the children would be devastated if anything happened to you. Just the children, Isaiah found himself wondering, then immediately chastised himself for the thought. Of course she meant the children. Their arrangement was one of practical necessity, nothing more. Yet as January had given way to February, something had shifted between them. Conversations that once felt stilted now flowed easily. They worked together with increasing coordination, anticipating each other's needs, forming a partnership that went beyond mere cohabitation. The children, too, had settled into a routine that included Isaiah as a central figure. Even baby Thomas, initially wary of the tall stranger, now reached for Isaiah with trusting hands. It was temporary, Isaiah reminded himself sternly. Once the weather broke, they would continue to Helena. His life would return to its solitary pattern, better not to grow attached. Dawn came grudgingly the next morning, the sky a sullen gray that promised more snow by afternoon. Isaiah prepared for his journey with practiced efficiency, packing spare ammunition, dried meat, and an extra blanket. You'll be careful, Nora asked as she handed him a small package of biscuits she'd set aside from their dwindling stores. Always am, he replied, tucking the food into his saddlebag. She hesitated, then impulsively touched his arm. Thank you, Isaiah, for everything. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through him despite the pre-dawn chill. Look after things till I get back, he said gruffly, suddenly eager to be away from the confusing emotions her presence stirred. The journey to Henderson's took longer than anticipated. Fresh snow had obscured landmarks, forcing Isaiah to navigate by memory and instinct. By the time he spotted the smoke from Henderson's chimney, the sun had passed its zenith, and his concern about returning before dark had intensified. Henderson himself proved both more lucid and more generous than Isaiah had dared hope. The old man's rheumy eyes brightened with interest at the mention of a widow and her children sheltering at Isaiah's place. "'Bout time you had some company out there," Henderson observed, rummaging through his stores. "Man wasn't meant to live so solitary, especially not a young buck like yourself." Isaiah deflected the implied question. "They're just passing through, headed to Helena when the weather breaks." Henderson snorted, handing over a sack of cornmeal and some dried apples. "Weather ain't breaking anytime soon. February's barely started." He paused, fixing Isaiah with a surprisingly shrewd gaze. "Wouldn't hurt you to consider a more permanent arrangement. Widow with 5 young uns could use a provider. Man like you could use a family." "It's not like that," Isaiah protested, uncomfortable with the old man's directness. "Maybe it should be," Henderson replied mildly, adding a precious jar of molasses to Isaiah's growing pile. "Take these. Consider it my wedding present." "There's not going to be any wedding," Isaiah insisted, though he accepted the supplies gratefully. Henderson merely smiled, the expression creasing his weathered face into a map of frontier hardship. "Time will tell, son, time will tell." The return journey began under threatening skies. Isaiah pushed his horse faster than was prudent, driven by a growing sense of unease. The old farmer's words had stirred up feelings he'd been trying to ignore for days. The comfort of Nora's presence, the joy of children's laughter in his previously silent cabin, the gradual awakening of emotions he'd thought long dead. Halfway home, the storm hit. Snow drove horizontally on howling winds, reducing visibility to mere feet. Isaiah bent low over his horse's neck, trusting the animal's instinct more than his own increasingly disoriented senses. A normal ride of just over an hour stretched to 3 as he fought through deepening drifts. By the time his cabin finally appeared through the swirling white, Isaiah was half frozen and completely exhausted. The door flew open before he could dismount, spilling golden lamplight onto the snow. Nora stood framed in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Thank God," she breathed as he staggered toward her. "The children have been watching at the window for hours." Inside, the cabin's warmth hit him like a physical force. Small hands reached for him, James taking his coat, Sarah pulling him toward the fire, William proudly showing him how he'd kept the woodbox filled. Even baby Thomas cooed from his makeshift cradle, tiny fists waving in greeting. The simple domesticity of the scene overwhelmed Isaiah more than the storm had. These people, this woman and her children, had transformed his barren shelter into something he'd never thought to have again. A home. "You're half frozen," Nora chided, pressing a cup of hot coffee into his hands. "What were you thinking, traveling in this weather?" "Had to get back," Isaiah said simply, his eyes meeting hers. Something in his expression made her breath catch visibly. Later, after the children were asleep and they sat alone by the fire, he told her about Henderson's assumptions and his generosity. "He seems to think," Isaiah hesitated, unsure how to frame the old man's blunt suggestions without embarrassing them both. "That we should marry," Nora finished for him, her directness surprising him. A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "It's a natural assumption, I suppose. A single man, a widow with children, all sharing a small cabin." Isaiah shifted uncomfortably. "I told him it wasn't like that." "Of course," Nora agreed quickly. "This is a temporary arrangement, nothing more." Yet something in her tone, a slight hesitation perhaps, made Isaiah wonder if she, like him, had begun to imagine different possibilities. "Henderson thinks the weather won't break for weeks yet," he said, changing the subject slightly. "We should plan accordingly, stretch the supplies, maybe set more rabbit snares." Nora nodded, accepting the shift to practical matters. But as they discussed survival strategies, Isaiah found himself watching the firelight play across her features, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the determined set of her mouth, the quiet strength in her brown eyes. And for the first time since finding her and her children in the snow, Isaiah confronted an uncomfortable truth. He no longer wanted this arrangement to be temporary. The realization terrified him more than any blizzard ever could. February stretched into March with little improvement in the weather. The world beyond Isaiah's property remained locked in winter's grip, though the days gradually lengthened, promising eventual relief. Inside the small cabin, the unlikely household settled into routines that grew more natural with each passing day. Isaiah expanded his hunting territory, determined to provide fresh meat despite dwindling game. James accompanied him on shorter excursions, soaking up wilderness knowledge with the eagerness of a boy who'd found an unexpected mentor. The younger children treated Isaiah with increasing familiarity, climbing into his lap during evening stories, bringing him small treasures, a uniquely shaped stick, a pretty stone for his approval. Only baby Thomas remained somewhat aloof, preferring his mother's arms to any other comfort. But even he had begun to offer toothless smiles when Isaiah spoke to him, a development that pleased Isaiah far more than he cared to admit. Most dangerous of all were the quiet evenings after the children slept, when he and Nora sat by the fire, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the harsh beauty of the Montana wilderness. In these unguarded moments, Isaiah felt the walls he'd built around his heart crumbling despite his efforts to maintain them. "Tell me about your family," Nora said one such evening, her fingers busy with mending while Isaiah cleaned his rifle. "You mentioned sisters before." Isaiah's hand stilled on the weapon. "Mary and Elizabeth, younger than me by 2 and 4 years. He paused, surprised by how easily their names came to his lips after years of avoiding even the thought of them. "Good girls, smart, always laughing about something." "And your parents?" "My father was a carpenter. Mother kept house, taught us reading and figures." The memories rose unbidden, his father's strong hands guiding his on a plane, his mother's voice singing hymns as she kneaded bread. "We were happy, ordinary." "Until the typhoid," Nora said softly. Isaiah nodded, his jaw tight. "I was away working on a neighbor's barn when it hit our street. By the time I got home, they were all sick. Buried them within a week of each other." Nora set aside her mending and leaned forward, her eyes full of compassion. "That's why you came west, to escape the memories." "And to avoid making new ones," Isaiah admitted. "I figured if I kept to myself, I'd never have to bury anyone I loved again." The words hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Nora's gaze dropped to her hands. Is that why you've remained unmarried? Fear of loss. Partly, Isaiah said, uncomfortable with her insight. Partly just circumstance. Not many eligible women in these parts, and I rarely go to town. Nora smiled faintly. I remember town dances from before I married. You would have had no shortage of partners. The image of a younger, carefree Nora dancing made Isaiah smile despite himself. Were you the belle of the ball, Mrs. Taylor? Hardly, she laughed. My hair was always escaping its pins, and I stepped on more than one unfortunate young man's toes. But I enjoyed it, her expression softened with remembrance. That's how I met Robert, my husband. He didn't mind my clumsy dancing or my strong opinions. He sounds like a good man, Isaiah said, surprised to find he meant it. The ghost of Nora's husband had hovered unacknowledged between them for weeks. He was, Nora agreed, kind, hardworking, he loved the children fiercely. She hesitated. But life wasn't easy, the farm struggled from the start. The last 2 years we barely harvested enough to feed ourselves, let alone pay the bank. Is that why you're going to your brother-in-law's? Nora nodded. Daniel has a store in Helena. He offered Robert a partnership once, but my husband was determined to make the farm work. Her eyes grew distant. He was so stubborn about it, if he'd only accepted help sooner. Proud men make hard choices, Isaiah said. We don't like admitting we can't handle things alone. Even when it's killing us, Nora asked, her gaze suddenly sharp. Isaiah felt the question like a physical blow. Were they still talking about her husband, or had the conversation shifted to his own stubborn isolation? Before he could formulate an answer, baby Thomas cried out from his cradle. Nora rose immediately, the moment broken. As she soothed the infant with practiced ease, Isaiah was left with the unsettling feeling that she had seen through his carefully constructed defenses to the fear that truly kept him alone. Not just the fear of loss, but the fear of inadequacy, of trying to love and protect a family, only to fail them when they needed him most. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having temporarily exhausted itself. Isaiah took advantage of the break in weather to check his cattle, finding them thin but surviving in the sheltered valley where they'd wisely gathered. As he rode back toward the cabin, a movement near the tree line caught his attention. He reined in, squinting against the sun's glare on snow. A deer, an elk, a young bull stood cautiously at forest's edge, hunger having driven it down from higher elevations. Isaiah slowly, silently dismounted, reaching for his rifle. An elk would mean meat for weeks, a godsend with their supplies dwindling faster than anticipated. He took careful aim, controlling his breathing as he'd taught James to do. The shot cracked across the valley. The elk staggered but didn't fall. Wounded, it bolted for the trees. Isaiah swore under his breath and gave chase, knowing a wounded animal would suffer if not tracked quickly. The pursuit led him deeper into the forest than he'd intended. Blood on snow made the trail easy to follow, but the terrain grew increasingly rugged. Finally, rounding a rocky outcropping, Isaiah found the elk collapsed in a small clearing, its breathing labored but its eyes still alert, watching him approach. He finished the animal quickly, respectfully, then set about the laborious task of field dressing. The elk was large enough that he would need to make multiple trips to transport all the meat back to the cabin. So focused was he on his work that Isaiah failed to notice the changing weather until the first snowflakes touched his face. Looking up, he saw dark clouds had swallowed the blue sky while he worked. The wind had shifted, carrying the damp smell that presaged heavy snow. "Damn it," he muttered, hastily cutting the choicest portions and wrapping them in the oilskin he carried for such purposes. He'd have to return for the rest, weather permitting. By the time he'd loaded the meat and remounted, visibility had deteriorated dramatically. Isaiah oriented himself carefully before setting out, but the swirling snow and gathering darkness quickly confounded his sense of direction. Trees that should have been familiar landmarks loomed as indistinct shadows in the whiteness. After an hour of increasingly disoriented wandering, Isaiah was forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. He was lost on his own property, with night falling and temperature dropping. "Keep moving," he told himself grimly. "Find shelter if you can't find home." But as the storm intensified and his horse struggled through deepening drifts, Isaiah's options narrowed. Cold seeped through his layers, numbing fingers and toes. The logical part of his mind recognized the symptoms of hypothermia beginning to take hold. Ironic, he thought distantly, that after rescuing Nora and her children from freezing, he might meet the same fate himself. The image of Nora's face rose in his mind, her concerned expression as she'd watched him ride out that morning, her final admonition to be careful. What would happen to her and the children if he didn't return? Would they try to reach town and risk the same fate that had nearly claimed them before? Or would they remain at the cabin until supplies ran out, hoping for his return? The thought galvanized him. They depended on him now whether he'd sought that responsibility or not. He couldn't fail them. With renewed determination, Isaiah forced himself to concentrate, to fight through the mental fogginess that accompanied severe cold. He'd lived on this land for 3 years. Even blinded by snow, he should be able to find his way home. When the cabin finally materialized from the whiteout conditions, Isaiah nearly wept with relief. Light glowed from its single window, a beacon guiding him the final yards. The door flew open as he approached. Nora stood silhouetted against the warm interior, her expression transforming from worry to relief as she recognized him. "Isaiah," she cried, rushing forward to help as he half fell from his horse. "We thought the children have been watching since the storm began." Her words tumbled over each other as she helped him toward the cabin, her arms strong around his waist despite their difference in size. Inside, the children crowded around, their faces mirroring their mother's concern. "I'm all right," Isaiah managed through chattering teeth. "Just cold, got turned around in the storm." "James, stoke the fire," Nora commanded. "Sarah, fetch the blankets from my bed. William, help your brother with the wood." The children scattered to their tasks, while Nora helped Isaiah remove his frozen outer garments. Her efficiency reminded him that she was no stranger to frontier emergencies. "I got an elk," he said, gesturing vaguely toward his horse. "Meat's in the saddlebags." "James can see to it once you're warm," Nora replied, her tone brooking no argument. "Sit by the fire before you collapse." Isaiah obeyed, too exhausted and cold to protest. The children returned with blankets, which Nora wrapped around his shoulders before pressing a cup of hot coffee into his trembling hands. "Drink," she instructed, slowly. As warmth gradually returned to his extremities, bringing the painful tingling of restored circulation, Isaiah became uncomfortably aware of Nora's scrutiny. Her brown eyes, usually warm with gratitude or amusement, now held something harder, anger, perhaps, or fear that had crystallized into determination. "You could have died out there," she said when the children had been dispatched to tend the horse and retrieve the meat. "I know these lands," Isaiah replied defensively. "Just got caught by the storm changing faster than expected." "And if you hadn't made it back," Nora pressed, her voice tight, "what would have become of us?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had voiced before. They both knew the truth. Without Isaiah, Nora and her children would face a precarious future indeed. The wilderness showed no mercy to a woman alone, no matter how capable. "I made it back," Isaiah said finally, reaching for her hand. "I'll always make it back." As soon as the words left his mouth, he recognized their significance. Not just a statement about today's close call, but a promise for the future. A future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine until now. Nora's expression softened, her fingers tightening around his. "See that you do," she whispered. "We need you, Isaiah Quinn. More than you know." In that moment, with the storm howling outside and Nora's hand warm in his, Isaiah faced a truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He needed them too. The widow and her 5 children had awakened something he thought long dead, the desire for connection, for family, for a life beyond mere survival. The realization terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The March thaw came grudgingly, teasing with days of sunshine followed by fresh snowfall. Isaiah and the Taylors marked 2 months of shared living with a small celebration, extra meat in the stew and the last of Henderson's molasses drizzled over cornbread. The children had presented Isaiah with a whittled wooden horse that James had carved under his guidance, a gift that left him uncharacteristically speechless. That night, after the children slept, Isaiah broached the subject he'd been avoiding. "Trail to Helena should be passable soon," he said, studying Nora's reaction carefully. "Another couple weeks, maybe less if the warm weather holds." Something flickered across her face, disappointment, resignation. She nodded, keeping her eyes on her mending. Yes, I suppose so. We've imposed on your hospitality far too long already. It's not an imposition, Isaiah said quickly. That's not what I meant. Nora looked up, her expression guarded. What did you mean, then? Isaiah hesitated, suddenly unsure how to express the thoughts that had occupied him since his near disaster in the storm. How could he ask this woman, who had already endured so much hardship, to consider binding her future to his uncertain prospects? What right did he have to suggest she abandon the security her brother-in-law offered in Helena for the precarious existence of a struggling cattle ranch? I was thinking, he began carefully, that the journey to Helena would still be difficult with 5 children. Dangerous, even. We've faced difficult journeys before, Nora replied, though her tone lacked conviction. You could stay, Isaiah said, the words coming more abruptly than he'd intended. Here I mean not just until spring, but longer. Nora set aside her mending, her full attention now on his face. Are you offering charity, Mr. Quinn? Because while I'm grateful for all you've done, I won't be a burden to. No, Isaiah interrupted, not charity. Not that at all, he took a deep breath. I'm offering partnership, a future together. The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. Nora's expression remained unreadable, her hands perfectly still in her lap. You barely know me, she said finally. I know enough, Isaiah countered. I know you're strong, resilient, kind, even when life's been unkind to you. I know you're a devoted mother who would do anything for her children. He paused. And I know that these past months have been the first time, since I lost my family, that I've felt truly alive. Nora's eyes softened, but her practical nature asserted itself. This ranch barely supports 1 person. How could it feed 7? It could with work, Isaiah insisted. The herd's small now, but with another year of calving it'll grow. There's good soil in the valley for crops. With your skills and my labor, we could build something here. Something lasting. And the children, Nora asked. There's no school, no doctor nearby. I can teach what I know. James is already learning ranching. The others will too, in time. As for schooling, you've kept up their letters and numbers. Between us, they won't lack for education. He leaned forward earnestly. And Cottonwood Springs is growing. They're talking about a proper school by next year, maybe even a church. Nora studied him, her expression thoughtful. Are you proposing marriage, Isaiah Quinn? The directness of the question momentarily flustered him. Yes, I suppose I am. Not very romantically, I admit. A small smile curved Nora's lips. Romance isn't what raises 5 children or survives Montana winters. She hesitated. But marriage should be more than practical convenience. There should be affection, at least. Isaiah felt heat rise to his face. There is, he said quietly, on my part at least. More than affection, if I'm honest. Nora's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time in their acquaintance, she seemed genuinely taken aback. You've never said. I'm saying it now, Isaiah interrupted. I love you, Nora Taylor. I didn't mean for it to happen, didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but there it is. Nora's composure faltered, vulnerability showing through her usual calm exterior. Isaiah, You don't need to answer now, he said quickly. It's a big decision. Your children's futures are at stake, think on it. Talk to James if you want, he's old enough to have a say. Nora nodded slowly. I will think on it carefully. She rose, gathering her mending. Good night, Isaiah. Good night, Nora. As she moved to her sleeping area, Isaiah remained by the fire, staring into the flames. He had laid his heart bare for the first time in years, and now all he could do was wait for her verdict. The prospect of rejection, of watching Nora and her children continue to Helena once the roads cleared, filled him with a dread more profound than any physical danger he'd faced. He had told her the truth. He loved her. But had he also told her the whole truth? That love terrified him. That despite his confident words about their future, he doubted his ability to be the husband and father her family deserved. The next day brought an unexpected shift in the household dynamic. Nora was quieter than usual, thoughtful, while the children seemed to orbit around Isaiah with increased attention, as if sensing something important hung in the balance. James cornered him while they checked rabbit snares in the afternoon. Mr. Quinn, the boy began, uncharacteristically hesitant, are you going to marry my mother? Isaiah nearly tripped over a fallen branch. Has she discussed this with you? James shook his head. No, sir, but I heard you talking last night, not everything, just enough. Isaiah sighed, running a hand through his hair. I asked your mother to consider it, yes. She hasn't given me an answer yet. Do you love her? James asked bluntly, his young face serious beyond his years. I do, Isaiah answered honestly, and I care for all of you children too. James nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. Pa would have liked you. He always said a man should be judged by how he treats those who can't repay him. The boy hesitated. If she says yes, would I still call you Mr. Quinn, or? The implication hung in the air between them. Isaiah's throat tightened unexpectedly. Whatever you're comfortable with, he managed. But I'd be honored if you called me Isaiah to start. The rest, well, that would be between us to figure out over time. James nodded solemnly. I'd like to stay here, he said after a moment. The ranch, I like learning about the cattle and hunting, and the others are happy too. Sarah says it feels like home already. That evening, the household routine proceeded as usual, though Isaiah caught Nora watching him with the children, her expression thoughtful as he helped William with a wooden toy he was carving, or lifted little Lucy onto his shoulders to reach a high shelf. After the children were asleep, she joined him by the fire, her decision apparently made. James came to me this afternoon, she began. He had quite a lot to say about you and about staying here. I didn't put him up to it, Isaiah said quickly. I know, Nora replied with a small smile. My son speaks his own mind sometimes too freely. She took a deep breath. He seems quite certain that we should accept your proposal. Isaiah's heart quickened. And what does his mother think? Nora met his gaze steadily. His mother thinks that life offers few second chances, especially on the frontier. When Robert died, I thought my path was set, struggle alone until I reached Daniel's protection, then live on his charity while raising my children. She paused. It wasn't a happy prospect, but it seemed the only one available to me. And now, Isaiah prompted when she fell silent, now I find myself offered something unexpected, a partnership as you called it. A chance to build something rather than merely survive. Her voice softened, and the possibility of companionship with a man I've come to admire greatly. Is that a yes? Isaiah asked, hardly daring to hope. It's a yes, Nora confirmed, but with conditions. Name them, Isaiah said immediately. This must be a true marriage, not merely a convenient arrangement, Nora said firmly. I won't be just a housekeeper or a mother to my children. I expect to be your partner in all things, decisions about the ranch, the children's upbringing, our future together. Agreed, Isaiah nodded. The children must be considered yours in every way that matters, she continued. Not just James, who's useful on the ranch, but all of them. The girls too, and baby Thomas. Of course, Isaiah said, mildly offended that she thought this needed stating. I already care for them as if they were my own. Nora's expression softened. I know you do. That's part of why I'm saying yes, she hesitated. There's one more condition, the most important one. What is it? Isaiah asked, suddenly nervous. You must promise never to shut me out, Nora said quietly. I understand your fear of loss, I share it. But if we do this, we face whatever comes together, good or bad, joy or sorrow. No retreating into solitude when life grows difficult. Isaiah swallowed hard. She had identified his core weakness, the pattern that had defined his life since losing his family. Could he truly promise never to withdraw when faced with pain or fear? Looking into Nora's earnest face, he knew he had to try. I promise, he said solemnly. It won't always be easy for me. I've been alone a long time, but I'll never shut you out intentionally, and if I start to without realizing, you have my permission to call me on it. Nora smiled, the expression transforming her face with a radiance that took his breath away. Then my answer is yes, Isaiah Quinn, I will marry you. Joy surged through him, powerful and unfamiliar. Without thinking, he reached for her, drawing her into an embrace that felt both new and somehow inevitable. When their lips met for the first time, the last of Isaiah's doubts melted away. This was right, this was meant to be. When? He asked when they finally drew apart. As soon as the trail to town clears enough for travel, Nora replied practically. We'll need a proper preacher and witnesses. Isaiah nodded, already mentally calculating what needed to be done to transform his bachelor quarters into a family home. The single room would need expansion, proper bedrooms for the children, privacy for himself and Nora. The furnishings, adequate for a solitary man, would need supplementing for a family of 7. "We should tell the children in the morning," Nora said, interrupting his planning, "though I suspect James already knows what I was going to say." "He's a perceptive boy," Isaiah agreed. "He'll make a fine rancher someday." "Our son," Nora corrected gently, "if you meant what you said about the children being yours." "Our son," Isaiah repeated, the phrase filling him with unexpected pride, "and our daughters." "And little Thomas." As they continued planning late into the night, Isaiah marveled at the transformation in his life. 3 months ago, he had been a solitary man convinced that isolation was the price of survival. Now he was planning a marriage, a family, a future built on connection rather than retreat. The frontier hadn't changed, it remained as beautiful and harsh as ever, but his understanding of how to face it had shifted fundamentally. Not alone but together, not in fear but in hope. April brought the full thaw at last. Snowdrifts receded into muddy patches, and the creek swelled with runoff from the mountains. Green shoots appeared in sheltered areas, promising the renewal only spring can bring. Preparations for the journey to Cottonwood Springs occupied the household. Isaiah had expanded his original plan, deciding they should not only seek out the preacher for the wedding, but also purchase supplies for the cabin expansion and necessities for the growing family. "We'll need proper beds for everyone," he told Nora as they made lists by lamplight. "And fabrics for curtains, bedding, more cookware too, I expect." Nora smiled at his enthusiasm. "You're eager to spend money we barely have." "I've been saving for 3 years with nothing to spend it on," Isaiah replied. "About time it went to good use." The children's excitement about the upcoming wedding matched his own. Sarah and Lucy spoke constantly about the ceremony, while William peppered Isaiah with questions about whether he would now be their pa and what that would mean. Even baby Thomas seemed to sense the anticipation, babbling happily whenever the family gathered. Only James maintained a certain reserve, though his approval was evident in practical ways, working alongside Isaiah with increasing skill, referring to the ranch as ours rather than Mr. Quinn's planning for cattle expansions as if his future there were assured. The morning before their planned departure for town, Isaiah rose early to complete final preparations. The wagon had been repaired and checked thoroughly. The route had been scouted to ensure it was passable. Everything was ready for their journey. As he crossed the yard toward the barn, movement at the edge of his property caught his attention. Riders, 3 of them, approaching slowly but deliberately from the direction of the main trail. Isaiah tensed immediately. Visitors were rare in this remote area, especially this early in the season. He returned to the cabin for his rifle before stepping onto the porch to await their arrival. As the riders drew nearer, Isaiah could make out their appearances. The lead rider was a well-dressed man of perhaps 40, his city clothes suggesting he was no local rancher. Behind him rode 2 rougher-looking men, clearly hired hands or guards. "Hello, the house," the lead rider called when they were within hailing distance. "That's close enough," Isaiah responded, his rifle visible but not raised. "State your business." The man reined in his horse, studying the cabin and its surroundings with obvious interest. "I'm looking for Nora Taylor and her children. I have reason to believe they might be in these parts." Isaiah's grip tightened on his rifle. "Who's asking?" "Daniel Taylor," the man replied. "Her brother-in-law and you are." Isaiah hesitated, evaluating this unexpected development. If this truly was Nora's brother-in-law from Helena, his appearance complicated matters significantly. Before he could respond, the cabin door opened behind him and Nora stepped onto the porch, her expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Daniel," she called, "is that really you?" The man's face broke into a relieved smile. "Nora, thank God you're alive." He dismounted quickly, approaching the cabin. "We've been searching for months. When your wagon never arrived in Helena, I feared the worst." Nora descended the porch steps to meet him, accepting his embrace with visible emotion. "How did you find us?" "Reports from travelers, a woman with 5 children taken in by a rancher north of Cottonwood Springs. I followed every lead until it brought me here." Daniel held her at arm's length, examining her face. "You look well, the children." "All safe," Nora assured him, "thanks to Mr. Quinn here." Daniel turned to Isaiah, extending his hand. "Then I owe you an enormous debt of gratitude, sir." My brother would be thankful that you protected his family. Isaiah shook the offered hand briefly. They needed help. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Daniel disagreed. Taking in 6 strangers through a Montana winter shows exceptional generosity. He turned back to Nora. We should prepare to leave as soon as possible. I know the children must be tired after all you've been through, but Helena isn't far. You'll have a proper home there, as I promised Robert. Isaiah felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath his feet. Daniel spoke with the easy authority of a man used to having his suggestions obeyed, and his plans for Nora's future, plans made long before Isaiah entered the picture, suddenly seemed inevitable. Nora glanced between the 2 men, her expression troubled. Daniel, there's something you should know. She was interrupted by the excited cries of the children, who had heard the commotion and streamed from the cabin. Their initial wariness gave way to recognition when Nora introduced Daniel as their uncle, and soon the yard was filled with their chatter as they bombarded him with questions about Helena and the store he owned there. Only James remained subdued, standing slightly apart as he watched the interactions with a furrowed brow. His eyes met Isaiah's across the yard, sharing a moment of silent concern. Daniel proved charming and generous, producing small gifts for each child from his saddlebags, candy, a small doll for Lucy, a pocket knife for James. He spoke enthusiastically about the opportunities awaiting them in Helena. Proper schooling, social connections, a comfortable home in an established town. And of course, positions in the store for the boys when they're old enough, he added. A proper family business, as Robert and I always planned. Throughout his elaborate descriptions of their future, Isaiah noticed that Daniel referred to himself as their benefactor and protector, roles that, in Daniel's mind at least, had merely been temporarily filled by Isaiah during their time of need. When the children had been sent to pack their few belongings, Daniel assuming, without discussion, that they would leave immediately, Isaiah finally found himself alone with Nora and her brother-in-law. Mr. Quinn, Daniel began, his tone gracious but dismissive, I can't thank you enough for sheltering my family through the winter. I'd like to compensate you for your expenses, of course. That's not necessary, Isaiah said stiffly. I insist, Daniel pressed, reaching for his wallet. A man in your position can't afford such charity without reimbursement. A man in my position, Isaiah echoed, his temper rising. Daniel gestured vaguely at the modest cabin and surrounding property, a frontier rancher, admirable work of course, but hardly prosperous. He turned to Nora. You see now why I insisted Robert bring you to Helena. This kind of isolated existence is no life for a family. Nora's cheeks flushed. Daniel, you misunderstand the situation. Isaiah, Mr. Quinn, and I are to be married. Tomorrow, in fact. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Married? Nora, you can't be serious. He lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Isaiah from hearing. I understand gratitude for your rescue, but marriage, to a man you barely know in a place like this. I know him well enough, Nora replied firmly. We've lived under the same roof for 3 months. I've seen his character and how he treats my children, how he works, how he faces hardship. Daniel shook his head. It's too soon after Robert, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Nora countered. Isaiah offers more than charity or protection. He offers partnership, a future we build together, not one where I live on your generosity. Daniel's expression hardened. And what of the children? Do they deserve to be raised in this wilderness, miles from proper schooling or society? Is that what Robert would have wanted for them? The question struck home. Isaiah saw doubt flicker across Nora's face for the first time since she'd accepted his proposal. Robert's wishes for his children, the dying request of her husband, clearly held significant weight. The children are happy here, she said, though with less certainty than before. They've grown attached to Isaiah and the ranch. Of course they have, Daniel said more gently. He saved their lives, but childhood attachments form and dissolve quickly. In Helena, they'll have opportunities they can't even imagine here. Education, social standing, secure futures. Isaiah felt the conversation slipping away from him, his carefully constructed dreams unraveling with each of Daniel's persuasive arguments. The worst part was that he couldn't entirely disagree. Helena would offer advantages his remote ranch couldn't match, advantages that might indeed be better for the children in the long term. Perhaps, he said finally, drawing both their attention, this decision shouldn't be made hastily. Daniel has traveled far and everyone's emotions are running high. Why not take a few days, let the dust settle? Daniel nodded approvingly, a sensible suggestion. Nora should have time to consider all options carefully. His tone made it clear which option he considered superior. Nora looked between them, conflict evident in her expression. Yes, I suppose that's wise. She touched Isaiah's arm briefly. We should postpone our trip to town until we've sorted this out. Isaiah nodded, though inside he felt as though something precious was already slipping through his fingers. I'll let Henderson know we won't be coming for the preacher yet. The rest of the day passed in strained politeness. Daniel's men made camp nearby, while he accepted Nora's invitation to stay in the cabin. The children, oblivious to the tension among the adults, chattered excitedly about both Helena's attractions and their plans for the ranch, an impossible contradiction that no one had the heart to clarify for them. That night, with Daniel settled on a pallet near the fire and the children finally asleep, Isaiah and Nora found a rare moment of privacy outside on the porch. The spring night was chilly but clear, stars brilliant overhead in the vast Montana sky. I'm sorry, Nora said quietly. I never expected Daniel to find us, especially now. He loves your children, Isaiah acknowledged, wants what's best for them. As do I, Nora replied. That's what makes this so difficult. Isaiah steeled himself to ask the question that had haunted him all day. Are you reconsidering, our plans, I mean? Nora didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When Robert was dying, she said finally, he made me promise to take the children to Daniel. He believed Helena offered them security I couldn't provide alone. You wouldn't be alone anymore, Isaiah reminded her. No, she agreed, but Daniel isn't wrong about the advantages Helena offers. Schools, doctors, society. She turned to face him directly. The life you and I discussed building here would be good, Isaiah. Full of love and hard work and meaning, but would it be best for the children? That's the question I can't escape. Isaiah felt his heart constricting painfully in his chest. I can't compete with a town like Helena. Can't offer the same comforts or opportunities. He took her hand. But I can offer them a father who would die for them, a home built with their future in mind, a life where they learn values that matter: honesty, hard work, connection to the land. Nora's fingers tightened around his. I know, and that matters more than Daniel understands. She sighed heavily. I need time, Isaiah, to think, to pray, to be certain. Take the time you need, Isaiah said, though each word cost him. I'll respect whatever decision you make. Later, lying sleepless in the barn, where he'd relocated to give Daniel his usual place by the fire, Isaiah confronted the bitter possibility that he might lose this unexpected family before they were truly his. The irony didn't escape him. He who had feared attachment for so long now faced losing what he loved precisely because he had finally opened his heart. The next 3 days stretched endlessly. Daniel proved to be an amiable guest, winning over the younger children with stories of Helena and promises of treats awaiting them there. He was carefully respectful toward Isaiah, never directly undermining his position, but subtly emphasizing the contrast between frontier hardship and town comforts at every opportunity. Only James remained loyal to the ranch and to Isaiah, stubbornly refusing to be enticed by Daniel's descriptions of the store where he would someday work. I don't want to be a shopkeeper, the boy declared at supper on the third evening. I want to be a rancher like Isaiah. Daniel smiled indulgently. You're young yet, James. Many boys go through a cowboy phase, but as you grow, you'll see the advantages of business over physical labor. It's not a phase, James insisted. And ranching's not just physical labor, it's knowing the land, caring for animals, building something that lasts. Isaiah felt a surge of pride at the boy's words, so similar to what he himself might have said, yet formed independently through James's own observations and experiences. Well said, he commented quietly. James shot him a grateful look. Daniel's smile tightened slightly. Perhaps this conversation is premature. No decisions have been made yet. But Nora's expression as she looked between her son and Isaiah suggested that perhaps decisions were indeed forming, if not yet spoken aloud. Later that night, after the household had settled, Isaiah sat alone on the porch, unable to sleep. The spring air carried the scent of new growth, a promise of renewal that seemed cruelly at odds with the potential dissolution of his hopes. Soft footsteps behind him announced Nora's presence before she spoke. "May I join you?" she asked. Isaiah nodded, making room for her on the rough-hewn bench. For several minutes they sat in silence, watching the moonlight silvering the landscape. "I've made my decision," Nora said finally. Isaiah held himself very still, afraid to hope, afraid to despair. "Whatever it is, I'll understand." Nora turned to face him, her expression solemn in the moonlight. "When I lost Robert, I thought my life was mapped out for me. Struggle, sacrifice, dependency on Daniel's charity. I accepted that fate because I saw no alternative." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "Then you found us in the snow, saved us, and gradually showed me another possibility, partnership instead of dependency. A life built together instead of endured alone." Isaiah's heart quickened. "Nora." "I'm staying," she said simply. "The children and I were staying here with you if you still want us." Joy surged through him, so powerful he could barely speak. "More than anything." "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "Daniel won't understand. He'll think I'm betraying Robert's wishes." "Robert wanted security for his children," Isaiah said. "We can provide that, different from what he imagined, perhaps, but real nonetheless." Nora nodded. "That's what I realized these past days, watching you with them. You already love them as your own, and they love you." She smiled softly. "Especially James, he'd follow you anywhere." "He's a fine boy," Isaiah said, his voice rough with emotion. "They all are, and their mother is the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." In the silver moonlight, with the scent of spring around them and hope unfurling in his heart, Isaiah gathered Nora into his arms. Their kiss held both promise and certainty, the beginning of a shared journey neither had anticipated, but both now embraced wholeheartedly. Daniel took the news poorly, as expected. His initial disbelief gave way to anger, then to wounded dignity, and finally to a grudging acceptance when it became clear that Nora would not be swayed. "Robert trusted me to look after you," he said during their final conversation. "I've failed him." "No," Nora replied gently. "You offered exactly what he asked of you, but circumstances have changed in ways neither of you could have foreseen." She took his hands in hers. "Isaiah isn't replacing Robert in our hearts. He's creating his own place there." Daniel glanced toward the corral, where Isaiah was showing James and William how to repair a section of fence. "He seems a decent man," he conceded reluctantly. "But this life is so hard, Nora, so isolated." "Not as isolated as you think," she smiled. "There's Henderson's place nearby. The town is growing. Isaiah says more families are settling in the valley each year." Daniel sighed heavily. "You've made up your mind, I can see that." He squeezed her hands. "Just promise me that if things don't work out, if you ever need help, you'll write to me immediately." "I promise," Nora assured him. "And you'll visit. The children should know their uncle." "Of course," Daniel agreed, "perhaps in the fall when business is slower." Their farewells the next morning were emotional, but without bitterness. Daniel embraced each child, extracting promises that they would study hard and write to him often. To Isaiah, he offered a firm handshake, and a pointed look that communicated both acceptance and warning. "Take care of them," he said simply. "With everything I have," Isaiah replied. As Daniel and his men rode away, the family gathered on the porch to wave until they disappeared from sight. An uncertain silence followed their departure, as if everyone felt the weight of the choice they had made. It was Lucy, only 3 years old and unfazed by adult complexities, who broke the moment. "Are we going to town to make Isaiah our papa now?" she asked, tugging at her mother's skirt. Nora laughed, the tension dissolving. "Yes, sweetheart, as soon as we can." Isaiah scooped the little girl into his arms. "How about tomorrow?" "Weather looks fair. Trail should be dry enough for the wagon." James stepped forward. "We should finish the corral repair first," he said with newfound authority. "Can't leave things half done." "Spoken like a true rancher," Isaiah approved. "All right then, corral today, wedding tomorrow." The family dispersed to their various tasks with renewed purpose. As Nora turned to head back into the cabin, Isaiah caught her arm gently. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. She smiled up at him, certainty in her brown eyes. "Not one. This is where we belong now, all of us together." The wedding took place the following afternoon in Cottonwood Springs' small church, with Henderson and a handful of townspeople as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the preacher's words about building a life together particularly poignant for a couple whose union had literally begun with survival against the elements. When Isaiah kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, the children cheered so enthusiastically that the entire congregation burst into laughter. Even baby Thomas contributed, his happy babbling a counterpoint to the more formal responses of the ceremony. That evening, after celebrating with a proper meal at the town's only restaurant, a luxury that left the children wide-eyed with excitement, the family journeyed home to the ranch that would now truly be theirs together. As the wagon crested the final rise, giving them a view of the cabin nestled in the valley below, Isaiah felt a surge of gratitude that nearly overwhelmed him. 3 months ago, he had been a solitary man convinced that isolation was the price of safety in a harsh land. Now, with Nora beside him and 5 children behind him, he understood a deeper truth. True safety came not from avoiding connection, but from embracing it fully. "It's not much to look at yet," he said, nodding toward the cabin. "But we'll expand it this summer. Proper bedrooms for everyone, maybe a separate kitchen eventually." "It's perfect," Nora replied, leaning against his shoulder. "It's home." Isaiah guided the wagon down the slope, toward the future they would build together. Behind them, the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of promise. A poor rancher found a starving widow and her 5 children in the snow, Nora mused, her voice soft with wonder. And somehow, that moment of desperation became the beginning of everything. "Not the end of your journey," Isaiah agreed, "but the start of ours." As they approached the cabin, their cabin now, their home, Isaiah Quinn finally understood that the frontier's greatest lesson wasn't about survival at all. It was about finding the courage to love despite uncertainty, to build family despite hardship, to create home even in the wilderness. And that, he reflected as he helped his wife and children down from the wagon, was a lesson worth learning, no matter how long it took.